The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the ancient tomb, but the warmth did little to soften the tension in the air. Tourists wandered through the stone corridors, cameras flashing, voices echoing against centuries-old walls. Yet near the ceremonial guard post, something else was stirring. A storm of arrogance and recklessness that no one could ignore. Ethan, a young man with broad shoulders and a swagger that screamed overconfidence, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. His friends laughed nervously behind him, sensing trouble but powerless to stop it. Ethan's eyes locked on the guard, Marcus, a man who seemed carved from stone itself. Standing perfectly still, Marcus exuded authority without a single word. His uniform was immaculate, his posture flawless, every muscle controlled, every movement disciplined. Ethan snorted, a low, mocking sound. "What's the matter, statue? Can't even blink," he taunted, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the onlookers. The crowd chuckled, some nervously, others excited to witness what promised to be a showdown. Ethan flexed his arm, testing the air, then slowly reached out and grabbed the guard's wrist, laughing at the supposed ease with which he could overpower this silent figure. Time seemed to slow. The murmurs died as Marcus's eyes flicked to Ethan's hand. And then, with a precision that made the crowd collectively hold its breath, Marcus locked Ethan's arm in place. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a struggle. It was a demonstration. Calm, controlled, devastating in its simplicity. The grin faded from Ethan's face, replaced with a flicker of panic. His friends froze, their phones trembling in their hands, capturing every second of the unfolding drama. The crowd went silent. Laughter vanished. Even the wind seemed to pause as though holding its own breath. Marcus's grip was firm, unyielding, yet there was no anger in his eyes, only unwavering discipline, and the quiet reminder that some forces are stronger than mere strength. Ethan tried to pull free, to laugh it off, to act like it was all a joke, but Marcus didn't budge. The realization hit him in waves. This was not a man to be mocked, not a moment to be taken lightly. And just as the first whispers of fear spread through the crowd, something happened that no one could have anticipated. But what happened next, no one in that crowd would ever forget. The tomb had stood for centuries, a silent sentinel over a history few truly understood. Its massive stone walls, engraved with intricate carvings, told stories of kings, battles, and rituals long forgotten. Tourists often came to marvel at its grandeur, snapping photos and whispering about its eerie beauty. But very few understood the rules that governed its sacred spaces. One of the most important rules was simple: never disrespect the ceremonial guards. These men were not mere performers in uniforms. They were highly trained protectors, bound by tradition, discipline, and honor. And at the center of that discipline stood Marcus. Marcus had been a guard for over a decade, his life devoted to the silent art of vigilance. He had trained in the harshest conditions, learning to control every movement, every reaction. His posture alone was a warning, unwavering, precise, and intimidating without ever needing to speak. Rumor among tourists was that Marcus had never broken form, never lost composure, no matter how chaotic the crowd or how foolish the provocations. He was a living embodiment of restraint, a man who turned discipline into power. Ethan, on the other hand, could not have been more different. He was young, reckless, and driven by one goal: attention. Traveling with his friends, he sought constant thrills and validation, believing that strength was measured in boldness, in showing dominance over anyone who seemed calm or composed. The idea of testing the guard, of proving himself in front of an audience, thrilled him. In his mind, Marcus's stillness was an invitation, a challenge to be conquered. The crowd that had gathered was a mixture of tourists, history enthusiasts, and casual onlookers. Cameras clicked incessantly, and whispers rippled through the air. Children clung to their parents' hands, sensing the tension even if they did not understand it. The guide, a nervous man named Thomas, had been trying to maintain order, explaining the significance of the guards and the sacred nature of the tomb. But his voice was drowned out by laughter and Ethan's mocking taunts. Ethan's friends, meanwhile, oscillated between embarrassment and excitement. Some urged him to stop, sensing that he was pushing boundaries too far, but others egged him on, craving the spectacle. In that moment, the crowd became a living character itself, a mix of curiosity, fear, and anticipation. Every eye was on the two central figures: Marcus, the unyielding protector, and Ethan, the arrogant intruder who had underestimated what he faced. Even the environment seemed to conspire with attention. The shadows of the setting sun stretched across the tomb's walls, twisting the carved faces into expressions of warning. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby trees, carrying whispers as if the tomb itself were murmuring caution. The air was thick, heavy with the expectation of conflict, yet underlined by the silent gravity of the location that it was a collision of worlds. The reckless ego of youth meeting centuries of disciplined tradition. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not flinch. He simply stood, a mountain of calm, while Ethan prepared to make a decision that would change the course of the day and perhaps his life. Every choice, every gesture, every heartbeat mattered in that moment, and the crowd, whether aware or not, held its collective breath, witnessing the quiet tension between arrogance and authority. This was not just a test of strength, it was a test of respect, discipline, and understanding, and in the next moments, those contrasts would explode into an unforgettable confrontation. The tension at the tomb post had reached a boiling point. Ethan's confidence, once unshakable, began to waver as he faced the stone-faced guard. His friends whispered urgently, waving their hands in subtle warnings, but the thrill of the moment outweighed caution. Ethan flexed his muscles, puffed out his chest, and stepped closer, the air around him crackling with arrogance. He wanted to show everyone and himself that no one could intimidate him, not even a silent, immovable guard. The crowd had grown silent, sensing the electricity in the air. Tourists who had been casually wandering now gathered closer, forming a half-circle around the tense tableau. Phones were raised, flashes firing, capturing every twitch and movement. Children clutched their parents, sensing something significant about to happen, even if they couldn't articulate it. Every eye was on Ethan and Marcus. Every heartbeat seemed amplified in the thick afternoon air. Ethan's grin widened. "Command statue. Let's see what you've got," he jeered, taunting the guard with loud theatrical gestures. He waved his arms in exaggerated motions, jumped lightly on the balls of his feet, and leaned in close. Marcus did not move. His eyes, sharp and calm, followed Ethan's every motion, but he did not flinch, did not react. The silence was deafening. And then came the moment Ethan had been waiting for. With a sudden burst of reckless energy, he lunged forward and grabbed Marcus's wrist, twisting it slightly as if to assert dominance. A laugh burst from the crowd, some nervous, some mocking, and Ethan's friends joined in, cheering him on. They thought it would be easy, a quick show of strength to embarrass the silent guard and win some attention. But Marcus did not budge. Time seemed to slow. The guard's eyes locked onto Ethan's hand, and in an instant, he locked the wrist in a precise, unyielding hold. It was a move so smooth, so controlled, that it looked almost like choreography rather than force. Ethan's muscles tensed in surprise and panic. He tried to pull free, but Marcus's grip was absolute. The crowd gasped. Phones wobbled in hands as tourists captured every second of the unfolding drama. Whispers turned into murmurs of awe. "Wow, did you see that?" Someone said, "He's not moving an inch." Another whispered, "That's incredible. Who is that guard?" The air vibrated with a mix of fear and fascination. Ethan struggled, his cocky grin fading into a mask of panic. His friends shouted, urging him to let go, but the ego that had brought him here would not yield so easily. He tried to twist, to yank, to even use his other hand to break free. But every attempt was anticipated, every move countered by Marcus's calm precision. It was not brute strength that dominated the situation. It was control, discipline, and years of training distilled into perfect execution. Security personnel, alerted by the commotion, rushed toward the scene. Yet even as they approached, Marcus did not release his hold. The guard's silent authority had already taken command of the situation. Ethan's arms trembled, and sweat beaded on his forehead. He realized, finally, that he had misjudged the man, the moment, and the sacred rules of this place. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some whispered to their neighbors, trying to process what they were witnessing. Others stood frozen, mesmerized by the display of mastery. "This is unbelievable," muttered one onlooker, shaking their head. Even the guide, Thomas, who had been frantic to maintain order, took a step back, realizing the gravity of what was unfolding. Marcus's control was absolute, his composure unbreakable, and the chaotic energy of Ethan's arrogance had been drained in an instant. Ethan's mind raced. He had always measured strength in aggression and bravado, but this was something else entirely. Discipline, precision.com in the face of chaos. It was a power far greater than he could comprehend. Panic replaced confidence. Desperation replaced arrogance. Every instinct screamed to break free, yet every move he made only tightened the trap. A tense silence enveloped the crowd. Even the wind seemed to pause, rustling the leaves with a hushed caution. Ethan's friends now turned pale, realizing their encouragement had contributed to the situation. Phones were still recording, but the focus had shifted. It was no longer about Ethan's stunt. It was about the guard who had neutralized a man in seconds, without a single shout or visible effort. Security finally arrived at Marcus's side, but the guard simply nodded to them, signaling that he had everything under control. No words were exchanged. Ethan, panting and red-faced, could do nothing but stare in disbelief. His arrogance had led him here, and for the first time he felt the weight of his misjudgment. As Marcus released the hold slowly, deliberately, the crowd exhaled collectively. Laughter, once brash and confident, had disappeared. Ethan stumbled backward, his mind reeling with shock and humiliation. He had thought he was the strongest, the boldest, the one in control, but in the eyes of discipline, tradition, and mastery, he had been utterly powerless. And as the murmurs of the crowd grew, spreading like wildfire, Ethan realized that this was not a moment he could simply laugh off. Videos would circulate, stories would be told, and the lesson, hard, unyielding, unforgettable, had only just begun. In that instant, the arrogant thug learned what strength truly meant. It wasn't muscle, it wasn't aggression, it was patience, control, and unwavering discipline, and the full consequences of his actions were about to unfold before everyone's eyes. The cool air of the tomb's hallway felt heavier now, weighed down by silence and the aftermath of the confrontation. Ethan sat slumped on a stone bench nearby, his muscles sore from the futile struggle, his pride bruised more deeply than his arm. The laughter of his friends had long since died, replaced by whispered apologies and nervous glances. For the first time, Ethan confronted a truth he had never faced before. Strength without discipline is nothing. Security had escorted him to a quieter room away from the crowd. There, a stern supervisor recounted the rules of the tomb, the centuries of tradition, the sacredness of the guard's duties, and the consequences for disrespecting them. Ethan listened, initially resistant, bristling at the idea of being scolded, but slowly, the words sank in. Each sentence chipped away at his arrogance, exposing a fragile core of regret and humiliation. Images from the crowd replayed in his mind, phones raised, whispers of awe, children frozen in fear, adults wide-eyed at Marcus's unshakable composure. Ethan had imagined triumph, imagined laughter and admiration. Instead, he had created a spectacle of his own failure. The weight of that realization pressed on him like a stone dot as he reflected. Flashes of Marcus's calm, unyielding gaze haunted him. There had been no anger, no malice, only discipline and restraint. That composure, Ethan realized, was far more powerful than any show of force he could muster. Strength, he finally understood, was not measured in biceps or bravado. It was measured in control, in respect, and in knowing when to act and when to remain still. Ethan's friends avoided his eyes, unsure how to reconcile their amusement with the gravity of what had happened. He could see their disappointment mirrored in the silent questions of the crowd. Even the tourist guide, Thomas, who had been frantic moments earlier, now regarded him with a mixture of concern and quiet judgment. This was not merely a lesson in etiquette. This was a lesson in humility, in understanding that actions carried consequences far beyond the moment they occurred. Hours later, as the tomb emptied and tourists dispersed, Ethan remained seated, replaying the confrontation over and over in his mind. He visualized each movement, each calculated response of Marcus, and began to see the enormity of what he had underestimated. The arrogance that had defined him was being replaced by a gnawing sense of responsibility, a desire to learn, to grow, and to never repeat such recklessness. By the time he left the tomb, Ethan was a changed man. His shoulders no longer carried the weight of ego, but a quiet recognition of his limitations. He felt shame, yes, but also clarity. Strength, he now understood, was not a performance for an audience. It was a quiet, disciplined force that commanded respect without demanding it. In the days that followed, videos of the incident spread across social media, viral for the sheer spectacle of Marcus's control. At first, Ethan winced at each notification, each comment mocking his folly, but gradually he began to internalize the lesson. Rather than dwelling on embarrassment, he reflected on the humility and restraint he had witnessed. He studied the principles behind Marcus's training, the philosophy that underpinned such unwavering discipline. For the first time in his life, Ethan understood that transformation was more than a moment of fear or humiliation. It was an ongoing process, shaped by reflection, acknowledgement of mistakes, and a willingness to embrace growth. The arrogance that had brought him to the tomb was gone, replaced by an emerging respect for the power of restraint and the quiet strength that could outmatch even the loudest displays of force. Ethan's journey had begun with a moment of recklessness, but it would be remembered for something far greater, the birth of humility. awareness, and true understanding of strength. He would never see a guard, a tomb, or a challenge the same way again. The tomb grounds were quiet now, the chaotic energy of earlier replaced by a calm that seemed almost sacred. Ethan walked slowly, his head lowered, absorbing the weight of what had happened. The crowd had dispersed, leaving only the echoes of whispers and the faint click of cameras long since put away. Every step he took was heavy, each one a reminder that his arrogance had been met with unyielding discipline. He approached Marcus one last time, not with bravado, not with mockery, but with the humility that had only recently begun to take root in him. Marcus, standing perfectly still, as always, acknowledged him with a small nod, not of approval, but of recognition that the lesson had been learned. There were no words exchanged, none were necessary. The silence itself spoke volumes, louder than any apology Ethan could offer. Ethan's friends lingered behind him, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. They had witnessed the transformation firsthand. The man who had swaggered with unchecked arrogance now walked with quiet reflection, eyes alert but respectful. They realized that this moment would remain etched in their memories, a stark reminder that disrespect had consequences far greater than anyone could anticipate. The viral videos began circulating almost immediately. Clips of Marcus's controlled, effortless hold on Ethan's arms spread across social media, amassing millions of views. Comments poured in, some mocking, some awestruck, all sharing the same sentiment. Discipline and restraint outweighed brute strength every time. Ethan saw them all. At first a pang of embarrassment struck him, sharp and bitter. But as he read more, a different feeling began to take shape. Understanding. He was seeing, in real time, the reach and impact of the lesson he had been forced to confront. By evening, Ethan found himself seated on a quiet bench, away from the crowds, reflecting on the day. The fear, the panic, the humiliation, all had led him to a singular realization: strength without respect, without control, is empty. Real power comes from the ability to act with patience, to remain calm in chaos, and to honor the traditions and structures that others have upheld for generations. As the sun set behind the tomb, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, Ethan took a deep breath and made a silent vow. He would carry this lesson forward, letting humility guide his actions and restraint shape his decisions. No longer would he measure himself by arrogance or physical dominance. The true measure of strength, he now understood, lay in the discipline of the mind and the integrity of one's character. Marcus, still standing at his post, was unaware of the quiet transformation he had inspired. To him, it was just another day of duty. To Ethan, it was the beginning of a new understanding, one that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The crowd, the laughter, the struggle, all were gone, but the lesson remained, etched into memory as sharply as the carvings on the tomb walls. And as Ethan walked away from the sacred ground, he knew one thing with certainty: some lessons are learned the hard way, but they are the ones that truly change you. As the shadows deepened across the ancient tomb, the day's chaos had faded into memory, leaving only lessons etched into the minds of those who had witnessed it. Ethan's reckless arrogance had been met with unwavering discipline, a reminder that true strength is never measured by muscle, loud words, or empty bravado. It is measured by control, respect, and the quiet authority that comes from years of dedication and restraint. The crowd had dispersed, but the story they carried would spread far beyond the tomb's walls. Videos of Marcus's calm, effortless mastery circulated online, sparking awe, debate, and reflection. For many, it was simply entertainment. For Ethan, it was a turning point, a moment that reshaped his understanding of power, humility, and consequence. He had faced the cost of arrogance firsthand, and it had left an indelible mark on his character. To anyone watching, the moral was clear: never underestimate quiet strength. True power doesn't need to shout, it doesn't need to flex, it commands attention simply by existing. And sometimes, the lessons that change us most profoundly come not from books, speeches, or teachers, but from moments that force us to confront our own ignorance and arrogance. Ethan's story is a cautionary tale for all of us, a reminder that the choices we make in moments of pride or impatience can have consequences far beyond what we anticipate. Respect your surroundings, respect those who serve, and never mistake physical strength for true authority. If you've ever witnessed someone underestimate the power of discipline, or if this story left your jaw on the floor, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to see more real-life moments where arrogance meets consequences. Share this video with someone who thinks they're too strong to fail, because sometimes, the lesson they need is waiting in the most unexpected place. And as for Ethan, he walked away a changed man, carrying a truth he could never forget. One reckless grab, one silent stare, and in a single heartbeat, his arrogance was shattered forever.